Well, I wasn't expecting this when I woke up this morning, but Harley Davidson has officially announced their new named business strategy, and it is back to bricks, giving us this new dose of hope, a bunch of new bikes, some announced returning motorcycles. But the question is this enough to move the needle and restore some of the hope and excitement in the brand that they've kind of squandered over the last, let's face it, like 6 or 7 years? Now, I'm not gonna focus too much on the nitty gritty business stuff because at the end of the day, I don't care and neither do you. Do you really care whether or not Harley Davidson is trying to get more people back in the office at Juneau? Nope. Now, there is a very specific reason I have the Sportster up on the lift here, and that is because Harley Davidson has actually announced the return of the air-cooled Sportster. Now, this is absolutely huge for Harley Davidson. I cannot stress enough how many problems in their lineup come from a missing air-cooled Sportster, because not only was this the gateway drug into the brand, it was also the gateway drug into one of the biggest parts of Harley Davidson culture and lifestyle, and that is the parts and accessories catalog. The crazy thing is they want to get back to selling this at $10,000, which, perfect. Cannot wait to see what they come up with here. And I have some inklings, we're gonna get more in depth later, but as far as I'm concerned, the Evo is dead, long live the Softail Sportster. The next thing I wanna talk about is the Sprint. Now, this was originally announced by Zeitz, claiming that this was going to be a new gateway motorcycle for the brand that's going to come in around $6,000. For the first time that I can think of, we actually see kind of a silhouette or outline of what the motorcycle looks like. And if you ask me, it looks a heck of a lot like this, the Benda Chinchilla 500. I mean, seriously, look at them side by side. You can definitely see some similarities there. But then when you look at the actual motor part, it looks a lot like the Hero 440 motor, which has me both excited and a little concerned. Again, we'll talk about some of this a little bit later on. Then we have this kind of monstrous, meaningless graph that Harley Davidson gave us that shows that they see 6 openings across their lineup. There's 2 openings in their Rev Max column, one at the high end and one at the low end. Then we've got the Softail column, which has some really low-hanging fruit here, as well as something kind of in the mid-range. One thing that is really nice to see is there are no openings north of $40,000. Good job, Harley. You realize that those motorcycles are too fucking expensive. Seriously, what the fuck is going on with like a $40,000 or $50,000 Road Glide? Who is actually buying one of those? But I will say it's really refreshing to hear from the Harley higher-ups that they need to be aiming lower. This is a really big deal, especially when you contrast it against Indian, where their new CEO said that there's basically no openings in Indian's lineup for a cheap, affordable motorcycle. Now, I've got some notes here about some of the more nitty-gritty aspects. We're gonna touch on this just because it's relevant. They want to improve dealer performance, and this is gonna be done by mostly, at least in the short term, eliminating a bunch of old stock that's sitting at these dealerships. Dealer inventories for Harley Davidson have been a huge problem for a long time, and it's been killing dealerships having to hold these motorcycles that are years out of date at this point. Then we've got a parts and accessories rework, which I think is gonna be kind of interesting. Harley Davidson has a good amount of parts and accessory stuff going on already, but a lot of it is just like bolt-on grips and levers and foot pegs and shit with different anodizing in the relief cuts in the aluminum. That's kind of weak. So I'd really like to see Harley Davidson spend a little bit more on performance upgrades for their motorcycles. For the love of all that's holy, Harley, please give us a 2-into-1 Screaming Eagle exhaust for the new Sportster that doesn't sit here. Maybe one that sits up like here. And then we've got another knife just jabbed right into the heart of Indian, because this feels kind of deliberately timed, but they want to move away from this aspirational lifestyle brand and get back to being a motorcycle company that sells t-shirts rather than a t-shirt company that sells motorcycles. You want to be a successful motorcycle company nowadays? You have to sell an affordable motorcycle that gets people into the brand. Especially now because, you know, I just looked at the gas prices and they're freaking $4.09 right here, which is 40 cents below the national average the day I'm filming this. Another thing I'd expect to see are some of these motorcycles coming in on the cheaper end, lacking a bunch of modern technology, which I know some people are going to love and other people are going to kind of hate. And honestly, I used to be in the kind of hate camp, but I've softened up a little bit on that, mostly because of the proliferation of these high quality aftermarket dashboards. I've tested a bunch of these, and if you wanted my recommendation, I would say go with this Chigee right here. This is the AIO6, which is their biggest and baddest option. You can also swap it from bike to bike, which is really nice. As you can see, it's not currently attached to my Sportster, but it literally clicks on in just a second. Not only does the AIO6 offer blind spot monitoring, it's got dash cams and Android Auto and Apple CarPlay all built into one touchscreen TFT dashboard. If any of this sounds good to you, click that link down in the description below where you can use the code SPICECORNER to get 10% off your order. Let's get back to it. There was also no mention of the RMCR concept, which I know people have been really itching to hear my thoughts about. And this is gonna get us into where I've kinda pulled back a little bit on my excitement lever when it comes to this announcement. Because usually this is the sort of thing where I'm like, yay, Harley Davidson is back, but I have been burned way too many times. So I'm now looking at this with a more cautious optimism, shall we say. And I also want to say, nothing that I'm going to mention from here on out doesn't mean they shouldn't do this. But with that said, let's start poking some holes, and we're going to start with the Sportster. Now, a lot of people are looking at this and they're like, okay, great, the Iron 883 is coming back. And I think they're doing that because they saw that outline of the motorcycle in the slideshow, and they saw the Evo motor with the two push rods here, which is a super iconic look. But the thing is, the Evo motor is not emissions compliant in the rest of the world. There is basically no way you are gonna get this stupid hunk of American iron to pass emissions anywhere, certainly not with Euro 5+. So what do I think is likely to happen? Certainly not the return of the Evo frame and the Evo motor. I think what we're going to see is we are going to see the Softail Sportster built on the back of a 107 Milwaukee 8. So real quick, basically everybody has confirmed that this is going to be an Evo Iron 883. I'm finding it a little odd. I can't really see exactly where the reference is to the Iron 883. Apparently it was in a Wall Street Journal article that is behind a paywall. I'm not paying for that. Sorry. But Lance Oliver said it, and if it's good enough for Lance, it's good enough for me. I do still think, based on the spreadsheet, that we may see a Softail Sportster, and here's why. So why am I thinking that versus just returning to the old Evo frame here? Well, first and foremost, they have no opening on their graph from hell for the return of the Evo platform. Secondly, there's that giant orange balloon on the Softail side of the graph that dangles down well below 10,000 bucks. This also really fits with their realignment of parts and accessories and into the blank canvas idea that they repeated multiple times through that presentation. They already have a ton of parts and accessories available for the Milwaukee 8, but if they bring out some more and then they get people into that platform for dirt cheap, they can spend a bunch of money building up their bike on a ton of Screaming Eagle stuff, or maybe just fancy relief cut aluminum foot pegs. Just imagine how many high performance big bore kits they can sell for $5 grand if they get people in the door with a Sportster for 10 versus 15,000 for the base Softail. The real problem I see with a Softail Sportster though is going to come down to the spec sheet warrior people out there. This is going to be a very heavy and very slow bike relative to the rest of the $10,000 offerings when it comes to cruisers. The Scout is gonna outperform it. The RevMax Sportsters are gonna outperform it. The Eliminator is probably going to outperform it, and probably the Rebel 500 too. But here's the thing, I don't think the buyer of this particular motorcycle is gonna care about the spec sheet. The bigger issue I have is actually with the Sprint bike, and I know I said just a second ago that you shouldn't be trusting the outline of the Sportster, when here I am about to use the outline of the Sprint to start poking some holes in that platform, but bear with me. When the bike was first announced, we'll call it, it's more of like a soft announcement, Zeitz said it was going to be coming in roughly around 6,000 bucks. But if you look at the presentation, it is now listed as under $10,000. So let's be charitable and split the difference between 6 and 10 and call it an $8,000 motorcycle. Are you going to spend roughly $1,500 more than the Rebel 500 and the Kawasaki Eliminator 500 for a Harley Davidson with a single cylinder motor that was built in India? I am willing to buy that bike if it comes in cheaper at $6,000 than the Rebel and the Eliminator, but at $8,000, it becomes kind of a tough sell. Even if it comes in at a flat $6,000 and it's $500 cheaper than the Eliminator and the Honda, I'd spend a little bit more to have the second cylinder, which will feel a little bit better on the highway. And now we arrive at the RMCR shaped hole in this entire presentation. But the big reason I've been holding off on making any videos about it is because it's been long-standing Harley Davidson company policy, essentially since the debacle with the Bronx, to not comment on concept motorcycles. It seems the one lesson that Harley Davidson learned from their experience with the Bronx was, let's not show off potential motorcycles that'll get people excited and then yank the rug out from under them. It's a good lesson, but the real lesson there, in my mind, would have been, well, let's not have yanked the rug out from people and just made the damn motorcycle, but that's besides the point. Now, if we look at the chart from hell that we've talked about a couple of times in this video already, and we lay out the existing RevMax motorcycles on here, and we assume that the Sportster S is about to be sunset or pruned from the lineup, whatever they want to say, here's roughly where all of those bikes are priced based on the existing motorcycles that would remain in the RevMax lineup. If you look at it, the Nightster and the Nightster Special are down here at the bottom, and then we've got all three Pan Americas up at the top with a big opening in the middle to top end of that price tier. I'm going to assume that because the y-axis here is not linear, nor is it particularly well labeled, that this range is roughly $24,000 to $23,000 at the top end to about $16,000 at the low end. Let's also assume that this is the place that they see the RMCR landing, and let's also assume that there are two variations, a 1250 and a 975. Based on the concept that we have right now, the 1250 all decked out with all the fancy parts, let's assume that lands at 23 grand with the specs that we know about the 1250 motor. That is dead on arrival. Look, I love Harley Davidson, and I actually really like the RMCR concept. I saw it at MotoGP, it's a beautiful bike. But the reality is, unless this is a very limited run motorcycle, there is no way that they are going to be competitive in a world with Ducati, KTM, and Aprilia, especially when that bike is only going to be making roughly 150 horsepower. If they're able to sell a 1250 variant of the RMCR for closer to $16,000, then we're talking. The problem is, I imagine that 16 grand-ish number is probably where they're going to slot a 975 RMCR, and I see that as also kind of being dead on arrival. When we're talking about the middleweight naked class of motorcycles, that is a class solely populated by riders who are die-hard spec sheet warriors and will go to the mat for their motorcycle being the best bang for the buck because it has 1 extra horsepower and they changed the gearing this year. I mean, just fucking talk to somebody who owns a street triple. Anybody out there who owns a street triple, get them talking about their motorcycle and you will see why a 975 RMCR it won't work. No. And that's where we get to my sort of unfortunate take when it comes to this business plan, and that is that it's just 3 years too late. In February of 2023, Buell announced the Super Cruiser and they started taking orders for it. There was a massive hype wave that basically was like, this is going to be the American cruiser. This is the return of the sporty American motorcycle. We're now 3 years later, and the hype train has gotten a second huge boost because the bike's officially entered production. Customers have their Super Cruisers. Jesus Christ, with all these fucking vehicles, this is a goddamn school bus. This is gonna take a minute. And look, I'm not just pinning all of my hopes on the Super Cruiser. The entire motorcycle industry looks a lot different now than it did 3 years ago. But just generally, the industry has come a long way in the last 3 years. And I'm not gonna wait another year or year and a half or 2 years for something cool to maybe come out of Harley Davidson. The reality is I've moved on. I've put down my deposit on a Super Cruiser. It's supposed to show up this year. In the meantime, I'm just gonna keep running my old Harley Davidson until this thing explodes, and then I'll figure out what to do with it from there. But here's the thing, just because Harley Davidson may have missed the boat on riders like me doesn't mean they shouldn't do this. All of this work, from the dealership level to new products, to the Sportster, to the Sprint, all of that stuff is gonna lay the groundwork to start building a new rider base. One that could appreciate a cruiser with 17s and a little bit more power and, God forbid, liquid cooling. All of that groundwork seems to be laid by the Back to Bricks business strategy here. This is a huge step in the right direction, but my ship has already sailed.